Okay, it's 6:02. We will start the public workshop and a few points of business before we actually dive in. This workshop is recorded, just FYI. So if any comments or questions you have will also be recorded and available online with the workshop once it's posted. If you feel uncomfortable with that, you're more than free to log off and view the presentation afterwards at your leisure on our website. So with that point of order taken care of, welcome to our second community workshop regarding SB9. I'm Laura, and joining me today is Linda Lee, our associate planner, my teammate, and also Zachary Dahl. He is the deputy director of the community development department. We make up the SB9 team in the city. So just giving you a little heads up of who we are. Before we dive in, we'll start with an agenda. So once again, my name is Laura Richstone. I'm an associate planner with the city. The purpose of this meeting tonight is to introduce and seek feedback on the major provisions of a local SB9 draft ordinance that we're currently writing. So we'll start with an introduction and a brief overview of what SB9 is, segue into a summary of the required state standards, move on to past feedback from previous city council study sessions and community workshops to bring everyone up to speed about where we are in the process. And then we'll discuss the major provisions of the actual draft ordinance. And then the presentation will conclude with a timeline and next steps in the ordinance process and a Q&A session at the end. And in addition, there'll be two quick polls just for us to get to know you, and then also gather your feedback on some specific questions. So with that, I'll pass it over to my colleague Linda for our first poll questions.
Thanks, Laura. So we're going to launch a short poll today. You should see this pop up on your screen. This poll is to help us learn who's in the room with us today and whether this is your first time hearing about SB9. I'll give this a minute as people respond to the questions. Right, waiting on 3 more responses. I'll give this a couple more seconds. All right, so this ends our first poll. And just to summarize, to give everyone a glance of who's in the room today. So 1 of 9 attendees indicated that this was their first time hearing about SB9. Everyone else has heard of it before. The second question we asked for folks to share with us who they are. Almost half of the attendees in the room, 44%, stated that they are a resident, they own property, and roughly 22% indicated that they are renters, work here, or don't live here but would like to. Oops, sorry, I did not press share results. So you should see that on your screen. And we'll also include it in a meeting summary afterwards. So back to you, Laura.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Let's see. Excellent. All right. So what is SB9? Effective January 1st of this year, SB9 is a state law that seeks to increase housing production in single-family zoned areas. There are 3 main types of development that's permitted under SB9. 2-unit duplex development, which is, essentially duplex development. Subdivisions or urban lot splits, where 1 lot is split into 2 lots. and a combination of the two where a lot can be split into 2 lots and duplex development can occur on each lot. One of the major provisions of the state law is that local jurisdictions must allow these types of development projects through a ministerial process, and we can only apply objective zoning, subdivision, and design standards. A ministerial process is very similar to what occurs with a building permit, where if certain standards or objective standards are met, meaning standards that involve little or no personal judgment on what the standard is, like a setback, for example, the city issues the permit without a public hearing, without public input, or a secret review, which is environmental review. Per state law, the city can only deny an SB9 application if the building official makes written findings based on a preponderance of evidence that the project would have specific adverse impacts to either public health, safety, and/or the environment, and where there is no feasible way to mitigate those impacts. Sorry, my clicker. There we go. Per SB9, or per state law, SB9 only applies to single-family zoned properties that are not designated as a local, state, or federal historic property, landmark, or district. SB9 also does not apply to single-family zoned properties when that property is located in a hazardous area, like an earthquake fault zone, floodway, or high fire area, to name a few, without meeting certain state standards for safety. This bill also includes several tenant protections to prevent the displacement of existing tenants and speculation by developers. And that includes restricting all units to residential uses only, a prohibition on short-term rentals like Airbnb, a prohibition of the demolition of existing affordable units, and a provision that SB9 development cannot occur in or on a unit that has been occupied by a tenant within the last 3 years. SB9 also identifies specific development standards that local jurisdictions must adhere to and allow. Overall, the city must allow at least 2 primary units or main units that are at least 800 square feet each in size on qualifying single-family zoned parcels. And furthermore, the city is prevented from establishing any local standard that would prevent this type of development, or preclude, I should say. For non-lot split projects, the state allows a minimum of 4 dwelling units per property, a 4-foot side and rear yard setback, a 16-foot height limit, and 1 parking space per unit, or no parking at all if the project is located within a 1/2 mile walking distance of a major transit stop or a transit corridor like El Camino. And once again, these state standards supersede any existing local standards for setbacks, height, and parking. Regarding urban lot splits, the state allows 1 parcel to be split into 2 parcels and requires the city to allow at least 2 dwelling units on each parcel, with the provision that jurisdictions can decide locally whether to allow up to 4 units per parcel. In addition, and similar to the duplex development that we were talking about on the previous slide, urban lot splits are restricted to residential uses only, and no short-term rentals are allowed on those properties. When a lot is split, or when a lot split is proposed, I should say, SB9 seeks to result in a parcel that is roughly similar in size. So applications for urban lot splits can have a maximum 60-40 split differential. In addition, the minimum parcel size for an urban lot split cannot be less than 1,200 square feet. Height, setback, and parking requirements are the same as those that are required for duplex development, meaning 4-foot side and rear yard setbacks, 16-foot height, and 1 parking space per unit per the state standards. While the city must follow the minimum standards outlined in the state law, SB 9 does provide some areas where the city can exercise some local discretion. These areas include demolition limits, public noticing, subdivision map life extensions, the number of dwelling units permitted on a lot split property, and the maximum size of an SB 9 unit. 2 previous city council study sessions in February and June, and 1 public workshop in May were held, where staff sought feedback and direction on these potential development standards to include in our draft ordinance. Feedback from the city council included increasing demolition limits to 50%, where currently the state law has 25%, requiring an informational public notice to all surrounding neighbors of the proposed development, not extending the life of a subdivision map at this time beyond those allowances already in our code, limiting urban lot split properties to a maximum of 2 dwelling units per lot, and finally allowing units larger than 800 square feet. Feedback from our previously held public workshop included allowing units larger than 800 square feet, allowing more than 2 units on urban lot split properties, and not creating open space requirements for SB 9. So with the feedback received from council and the public, staff has been drafting a local ordinance to implement SB 9 within the city. The major provisions of the draft ordinance include review and permit processing, and then additional development standards above the state requirements for 2-unit duplex development and urban lot splits. For review and processing, the major provisions of our draft ordinance for SB 9 units 800 square feet or less, those units would go through a ministerial permit process, where if the project meets objective standards, it would be approved at the staff level without a public hearing or public input as required by state law. Units larger than 800 square feet would be controlled by the maximum FAR allowance by the underlying zoning district and would go through a discretionary permit process, which is similar to what is currently required for new houses and large second-story additions in the city. This discretionary process, would be open to public comment, possible public hearings, and environmental CEQA review. Both permit processes, whether ministerial or discretionary, would require public noticing to inform neighbors of the potential development. Where SB 9 outlines certain development standards, the city can be more permissive than what the state requires. So in that vein, where the state has a maximum height limit of 16 feet for SB 9 units, the draft ordinance proposes a maximum plate height of 16 feet and peak height of 24 feet for detached units, and a 24-foot maximum plate height and 32-foot peak height for attached units. This aligns with the height limits allowed for accessory dwelling units. Parking generation would follow the state standards, but required or voluntarily provided parking would could either be covered or uncovered. And 2-unit development would also require a deed restriction that prohibits short-term rentals in any unit developed under SB 9 and limit those units to residential uses only as well. The draft ordinance also includes some interim objective design standards. Per SB 9, units 800 square feet or less in size are only subject to objective standards. And while the city does have design guidelines for single-family residences and duplexes, As guidelines, these documents have or contain very few objective standards, and as such, SB 9 projects will not be subject to most of the city's current design regulations. The interim design standards included in our draft ordinance would be applicable to the ministerial review projects only, which are those units 800 square feet or less, and would control the location of doors and windows for neighbor privacy, would control building massing and materials as well. These standards are intended to be interim in nature. The design standards are intended to be interim in nature and would be superseded by or amended to align with the final adopted version of the city's duplex and multifamily objective standards, which we are currently working on in a separate effort, and when those are approved. Additional local standards for urban lot splits in the draft ordinance include requiring a minimum 10-foot wide driveway or access corridor for flag lots or landlocked properties to allow adequate emergency access, limiting each parcel to a minimum of 2 dwelling units, and that's inclusive of an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, or a JADU, and requiring a deed restriction that prohibits further subdivision of the parcel using SB 9, prohibits short-term rentals, and prohibits the establishment of non-residential uses. And finally, an additional standard for urban lot splits would be the requirement that the owner of the property sign an affidavit stating that they intend to occupy one of the housing units as their principal residence for a minimum of 3 years from the date of project approval. And then that was a lot to digest, so I'll segue over to Linda for some poll questions.
Yeah, thanks, Laura, for the great overview. So the second and final poll should be launching on your screen. So for this second poll, we would like just your general feedback on 4 areas of the draft SB 9 ordinance. Please take a few minutes to review the questions and give us your thoughts. You may need to scroll down. The questions and answers are fairly lengthy, but we would really appreciate if you can give feedback on us, particularly on the discretionary review approach for SB 9 units, the building height for the detached units, limitations of the number of SB 9 units on urban lot split projects, and parking as well. So I'll give everyone a few minutes to participate. All right, about 60% responses. So I'll give this another 1 to 2 minutes. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end this poll and share the results this time. You should see it on your screen. So just a quick summary. The first question we asked, what is your thought about requiring discretionary review for SB 9 units over 800 square feet? Roughly half of the responses opted for no, allow SB 9 units to go up to the maximum FAR without further discretion or without the discretionary review process, while 5 of the 12 responded to requiring the discretionary review. And we had 1 response for not sure. For the second question about the parking, majority, 7 of the 12 responses said uncovered parking is fine, whereas 4 wanted us to require covered parking, and 1 response unsure. The third question, we asked whether detached SB9 units should be limited in building height. So about 75% of the responses asked or requested no, follow existing height limits in the R1 zone. So that would be a 24-foot plate line height and 32 roof peak, whereas 3 of the other respondents said yes, limit height to detached SB9 units similar to ADUs. And that would be a 16 feet plate line and 24-foot roof peak. And finally, the last question to consider, maximum number of units on SB9 units created through a lot split. Majority, 42% said no, limit the maximum to 2 units on each lot, whereas 2 other respondents said yes, allow up to 3 units on each lot with either 1 ADU or 1 JDU, in addition to the SB9 units. Let me scroll down. And the remaining 4 responded, yes, allow up to 3 to 4 units using a lot size tiered approach. Thank you all for participating. Let's give it back to Laura.
Thank you, Linda. So next steps in this process, step 1, we're here tonight to gather your feedback and incorporate it into our draft ordinance. Staff is planning on taking the draft ordinance to Planning Commission in late August 23rd of this year, and then taking taking the recommendations of the Planning Commission and the draft ordinance to City Council in September. And then if and when the draft ordinance is approved, staff intends to update or provide an update to Council within 1 year of the approval of the ordinance, or after 10 applications have been received, to assess its effectiveness and see if any updates or amendments are needed. And then this concludes our presentation. It was short and sweet. Thank you for staying with us. Our staff contact information is below. Once again, I'm Laura, and with us today is Linda, who's doing the polling, and we have Zach Dahl, the Community Deputy Development Director. If you would like more information, please visit our website, cityofsanmateo.org/SB9. We have a lot of good resources up there as well, and this presentation and video will be up after. So now we're going to open it to Q&A. I think there's only about 10 to 15 of us, which is a fairly small group. So unless Linda or Zach have any other thoughts, I was thinking of maybe opening it up to everyone, kind of like as a popcorn discussion. And then if it gets unruly, then we can, raise our hands thereafter. So Ashley, would you be able to allow any participants the ability to mute and unmute themselves as they wish? Or I guess Ashley is having some difficulties. Until she gets back, we can defer to the raise hand feature. So Ashley, can you let me know when you're back? And we can let's do raise hands.
Okay, so the first person who is going to talk is Max Mottner. So I'm going to go ahead and allow you to talk.
Hey, I think I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
Cool. My question was about, I realize this is a city council proposed addition to require notifying approximate neighbors. And I was curious what whether that's SB9 compliant, if that was discussed with our city attorney, and it sounds to me like it's not an obligation of SB9, and this has been a really common problem plaguing our planning commission in the past, is that people interpret those notifications as a sort of alert that they're able to block these constructions when they're by right and state law. And I personally am kind of against the idea, and also imposing that cost onto homeowners who are trying to do development. So I was curious whether demanding that of folks who are doing SB9 projects is legal, I guess.
Yes, we had this conversation internally. Currently, we have a process now where for some building permits, some small second-story additions, they also require noticing. So the thought with the draft ordinance would be following a similar process, but in this notice to neighbors for SB9, it would be very clear this is informational only, and just letting your neighbors know that a development is happening. Because on the flip side, if you come home one day and there's construction for 2 new houses, being aware of what's happening around you has its advantages. So that was the thought for including a public notice. This is a gray area in SB9. It doesn't say public noticing is required, nor does it say it's not required. And so the general direction was letting neighbors know, but also just being very upfront that this is informational only.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Yeah, kind of building on what Laura said, we would consider these like courtesy notices to the adjacent neighbors. And yeah, I think it's kind of part of the practice of being a good neighbor. If you're starting a project, ideally, you're letting your neighbors know just so they're aware. But yeah, the key is we would note it's not appealable. This is just a courtesy notice to let you know this development will be occurring and the city will be proceeding with approval.
Thank you, Zach.
Do you mind if I ask a quick follow-up question?
Sure.
I know in the past that these types of notices often go to the property owners and not to renters. And I was curious if there are other examples where we require folks to notify neighbors, whether there's a distinction made about notifying owners or notifying all residents, whether they own or not. Is that something that is being ironed out?
It can definitely be talked about. The thought was following our current practices, which is notifying of property owners. But for some of our larger mailing, we do notify the occupants of the building. So we can definitely have those discussions to see how that notice should take form.
Okay.
Thanks for answering my questions.
All right, the next person who has their hands raised or has their hand raised is Betsy Jacob. Betsy, you can unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, yes.
Okay, great. I'm just trying to, I want to know if there's any other property tax implications to be considered, what with regards to property taxes?
Yes, this is outside of my jurisdiction, so I'll be very broad with it. But anytime you do improvements on your property, an addition, a remodel, you'll always get reassessed. And to the question of how much, you'll have to talk to your tax assessor to see what those improvements would cost you. But yes, there would be tax implications for the owner.
So, sorry, just to follow up. So the new addition would be based on, so would the whole property be reassessed or part of the property? How does that work?
Yeah, that really depends on the assessor's office and how they assess properties.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, the next person with their hand raised is Max Marie Wilmot. Max Marie, you can unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm on as Max Marie. Well, I'm Sam, unless Max is talking, but I think she's asleep right now. So I actually can, and I don't know for the county of San Mateo, but I do know for other counties in California. If you don't make improvements, if you're doing the lot split subdivision and you don't make improvements on your main home, it actually gets reassessed with less land, and then they reassess the new lot on a sort of market basis. When you're not doing a lot split, then as they said in San Mateo, it will depend on what your sort of local policy is for renovations. I have a question about the 10-foot wide access driveway and how that's not effectively putting on a subjective standard, because like looking at most of your lots, and actually most lots in the Bay, it'd be very hard to subdivide a lot using that criteria without demolishing the main house, which obviously is prohibited in many situations where there are existing renters, or is economically infeasible. So I just kind of wanted your feedback on that, because obviously there is, 6-foot and 4-foot fire standards in the state, and I'm sure there's development that exists in San Mateo without a driveway past it. I know the ADU law sort of doesn't need that requirement, and so I just want to hear more on that from your guys' standpoint.
Yeah, thank you. So currently, right now, without SB9, flag or panhandle lots are not allowed within the city. So the creation of new panhandle lots are not allowed. SB9 has come in, and so now the city has to allow these types of lots. SB9 also allows local jurisdictions to require access to lots, flag lots, or any type of lot, I should say. So we are threading the, we're kind of going down the middle by allowing these flag lots, but also requiring some fire access or emergency access to the whatever main units are on the newly created lot. We've had discussions with the San Mateo Foster City Consolidated Fire District to review the size of these access driveways or corridors, however you want to classify them. And 10-foot was kind of, the sweet minimum. Some, depending on how long that pole is, that access has to be increased to 20 feet to meet fire code, so that a fire truck can, drive up it and then do a turnaround and come back. So it's a combination of fire code and allowing egress to these properties. Not all properties will be able to, it really depends on the type of property and how you configure your subdivision to really say if it would be precluding the subdivision or not.
And then,
yeah.
Laura, I can jump in and add a little bit more to that too. I think there's an important distinction between when you're, say, building a duplex or adding additional units to one lot, which then you do have those, you don't necessarily need a driveway, and I think as you had mentioned, but when you're creating a new lot, there's requirements that lot has to have a minimum sufficient access to the nearest public street. And so that's where, when you're doing the urban lot split provision, you need to provide that minimum 10-foot wide corridor that connects that lot in the rear to that public access, that public street. So if you have a narrow lot and you can't provide that, you always have the option to just build a duplex, add units on the lot without doing the split. So I think that's the key difference, and why it is consistent with SB9 to ask for this type of minimum access requirement when you're doing a lot split, as opposed to just building, say, a duplex or adding an additional unit.
Oh, can I still speak?
Yeah.
Great. Well, I don't know. I spoke to HCD about this because this has come up with cities, the fire truck being a specifically onerous example. They don't feel the same, but I know that's a difference between you and them. And I guess I'm struggling to understand. And also, if you do a duplex, it limits you to 2 units instead of 4 from the pre-existing lot. I guess I'm struggling to understand where the overwhelming evidence is about turning fire trucks around. I mean, fire hoses exist, and why the 6-foot state standard for access isn't good enough.
we can bring those questions back to the fire, consolidated fire district, and further have further discussions and refine. This is why we're having this meeting. I don't have answers for you right now. Our conversations with fire was 10 feet.
I don't expect you to have answers. I just wanted to
Yeah.
bring the question up.
Yeah, so thank you for bringing this to our attention, and we'll have further conversations with fire to see if there's wiggle room and where that is.
Thank you for hearing my question.
Okay, the next person with their hands raised is Becky Thompson. And Becky, you can unmute.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
First of all, I want to thank you for the presentation today. I have a couple, I hope, simple questions and one comment. One question is about parking. Does the parking requirement meant to be off-street parking, or can it include street parking?
Yes, so the parking would be off-street, so fully on the parcel.
Okay. My next question is, what is considered an earthquake fault zone? Because there's a lot of property that I've seen on earthquake hazard maps that are not particularly close to a fault zone, but because of where they're built, there's a higher risk of damage in the event of an earthquake. Foster
Yeah.
City, for example.
Yes, so earthquake fault zones or Alquist pre-Lolo zones, if I said that right, are mapped by the state. I think it's the Department of Conservation, and they are a certain distance. I can't remember the distance at this moment from the actual fault line, and there are extra requirements needed engineering wise to build in those buffer zones. But as you know, all of California is subject to earthquakes, so any development outside of those fault zones would have to meet our general California building code for earthquakes.
Okay, thank you. And then I had a comment about the occupancy affidavit. That's not something that you can change, but it doesn't seem like it would really have any effect. You know what I mean? What are you going to do if somebody doesn't move into the property that they built?
Yes. So it's a SB9. It's a requirement of SB9, not the affidavit part, but just to have the owner say that they'll live in a unit for 3 years. The city added the affidavit part to kind of give it a little more teeth.
Okay.
But you know, we will meet that speed bump when it arises, if it does.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
I don't have any more hands raised right now, so if you want to speak. Okay, looks like we have another one. Kashika McKinney. Go ahead and unmute.
Hi, my name is Kashika, and just to kind of piggyback on the previous question about the requirement for the affidavit, and I do understand that that might be something that you'll have to kind of do a deeper dive to work through. But I think another question I'd have is if you have a developer or someone else that's building a property or site, what would become of that requirement to sign an affidavit saying that, because they're obviously not going to live in the property. So that would be a question that I'd have also. Thank you.
Yes. When we intake the application, you know, we ask for a title report to identify the owner of the property. So the owner would have to be identified, and then they would be signing the affidavit and having it notarized that they would live in those units. Until they don't, or until someone calls in and says, hey, I don't think the owner is here, we take everyone at their word. And then it becomes a code issue or something along those lines, if and when an affidavit isn't adhered to.
Well, and I guess my question is if, someone wanted to, if they, purchased a lot and said, okay, we're going to build a house and an ADU, and would that still be a requirement, or is it just since they're doing a total rehab or tear down or whatever it might be, would it not even come into question because we're talking about a different process?
The SB9 has these requirements to prevent developers from coming in, and this is one of them, the occupancy affidavit, which kind of hopefully precludes developers from buying these lands, subdividing and selling them and flipping them. Sorry, I lost track of your question. I think that this the affidavit and the deed restriction, along with the demolition limits, work in tandem to make these types of development by developers less feasible. But we only have one application in right now for one lot split, and we're not seeing a developer subdivide, so that's not an issue we've come up against yet.
Okay, thank you.
All right, looks like the next hand raised is Max Marie Wilmoth again. Go ahead and unmute.
Thank you, Kashika. That was a great question, and it made me think a lot of the access standard stuff actually encourages someone who is, if I think the main goal of SB9 is to get existing homeowners to sort of be able to afford staying in place by selling part of their property. It could be debated if it's like ADUs, add a unit to rent it. If you can't SB9 a property, or its final value is determined by knocking down the main home, doesn't that encourage people to come in, buy a property that you couldn't do a flag lot on, and build 4 units after knocking down the home, just as an individual investor, even though they're not a developer, quote unquote?
Potentially. As a planner, we don't really look at is a developer or not developer, and if they're knocking down a home so much. We look at, do you follow the code? So if their application is to demolish the existing residences and as a new owner and build 2 new residences and whatever else, then and it follows SB9, then there's nothing precluding them from doing that. And having standards that would preclude someone from doing that, I don't know if that would be legally permissible.
Oh, I wasn't.
Just interjecting one other thing, and then to build on what Laura was saying, I do want to note that a property can achieve 4 units with or without an urban lot split. So you don't need the urban lot split in order to achieve 4 units. So I just did want to add clarification to that point. So if maybe the lot configuration isn't conducive, or the placement of the main house.
No, that's unique to you guys. I didn't catch that. I must have missed that slide. I'm sorry.
So I think the goal is to provide options, because obviously not every lot is conducive to an urban lot split, but maybe there's another opportunity with the configuration to still achieve an equivalent number of units, just in a duplex or combination of units.
Thanks for clarifying, Zach, and Laura, thank you for listening to my questions.
Definitely.
Okay, the next person with their hands raised is Jordan Grimes. Jordan, you can unmute.
Awesome. Hey, thanks everyone. Really appreciate this, this webinar and the chance to weigh in here. Couple quick things. I just mostly comments, but one question on at least as far as the discretionary review process. I really want to push back pretty strongly against that. I really think one of, I think, the most addressed shortages that we have in San Mateo is these multifamily units of 2, 3, 4 bedrooms. And so I think requiring discretionary review on SB9 units that are greater than 800 square feet is kind of in conflict with that goal. I think that if we are really trying to get those larger multifamily units, or at least higher bedroom count multifamily units, that we should be trying to make that process as easy as possible. And I really think discretionary review will gum up the works there. So I would encourage ministerial review to match the lower square footage properties. What else? Let's see. The public noticing is actually something I had a question about. I came in, and apologies because I've been trying to balance 2 other meetings. I think I heard this correctly when someone asked about public noticing, where those notices actually go. It sounds like they only go to the property owners and not to just everyone within a certain radius, but actual owners. And I'm curious if I misheard that or not, or if that's how that works right now.
Yeah, so the noticing for SB9 would be courtesy notice. It would follow our regular noticing procedures, which is a 500-foot radius notice to all property owners within 500 square feet, or a radius, I should say. And the mailing information is pulled from the assessor's records on the owners of the lot. It's also accompanied by a physical posting on site of a poster detailing the project. And those 2 types of postings, we hope,
Okay.
notices the most amount of people, either residences.
Well, Laura,
So-
sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
So for the city's standard practice, we do include its property owners and occupants.
Thank you.
And occupants also. Okay, that was really my question, was like, if I am renting, if I'm renting an apartment across the street, will I get a notice versus if I am, living in a house that I own. So that was really my question.
Thank
Okay.
you, Linda.
Okay, cool. Thanks for the clarification, Linda. That was helpful. Appreciate it. And that is all for me. Thanks.
Okay, if anybody else wants to speak, just raise your hand again. It doesn't look like we have any more hands raised.
What time is it? In that case, we'll maybe give it like a minute or 2 more. But yeah, to just kind of summarize our next steps, the draft ordinance will go to City Council August 23rd for their review and recommendation, and then it will be scheduled for a meeting with the City Council in September. So so Planning Commission in August and City Council in September. And then this presentation and recorded presentation will be online within the next few days to review. And our contact information is at the end. If you have further comments, questions, or concerns, send it to me and Linda or Zach, and we are happy to receive them and incorporate them into the draft ordinance going forward if possible. And then if no one else has any questions, or Zach, if you had anything else to add.
We have another hand raised, Laura.
Oh, great.
Alicia, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Terrific. Thanks a million. Hi, you guys. My name is Alicia Jones. I had a quick question actually on the feedback period that we're in right now. What are the other forums to which you're getting broader feedback from the citizens of San Mateo?
Yes, so we've gone to 2 City Council study sessions, which are public hearings open to the public. We've done one other public workshop, and then similar noticing for this workshop. And the last workshop was noticing to our e-newsletter, posting on our public social media pages, and other email listservs. And then for the Planning Commission, same type of outreach. And in addition, there'll be a newspaper notice as well, and posting at public facilities like the libraries and Central Park of the upcoming meeting.
Okay, great. And then are you beginning to get a preliminary read? Is information, are you starting to get kind of a pulse from that? Not necessarily asking what that is, but just curious to know if you are really beginning to hear back.
The City Council provided clear directions in their study sessions, and then our previous public workshop, I think only 10 members of the public attended, but we collected their feedback like we did you guys with polls, and we've taken those into consideration in drafting our draft ordinance. So as with any comments received today, that's why we're here, to get your feedback, to see if we're going in the right direction, and make these changes if possible before we go to Planning Commission in August.
Okay. Oh, terrific. I have one more quick question, kind of off the specifics of this, but when we're looking at increasing housing density, is the Planning Commission also looking at associated infrastructure? Things like sewer systems, public transportation, noise, cars, parking. I know we talked about parking as far as the lots themselves, but additional congestion downtown, et cetera.
Zach, I think this falls along the lines of GPU. I'll leave it to you.
So specific to SB 9, because this is a state legislative requirement, and so we're enacting our local ordinance to support what the state is requiring of the city. We're not looking at those requirements specifically because we don't really have the ability to look at that on a project by project basis. These would be ministerial projects. They are ministerial projects, which means we treat them similar to that of a building permit functionally. There isn't discretion allowed. Overall, we are assessing infrastructure as part of our general plan update, but that's a larger citywide effort. But with regard to SB 9 projects, we aren't looking at those components. We are limited. Typically, we would look at that in more detail as part of a lot split, but as part of an SB 9 project, we wouldn't be looking at that as we do have certain processing requirements as required by the state.
Okay, so there's a little bit of a decoupling then as a result of the city's requirement to be in compliance with SB 9. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, so we wouldn't be
Okay.
looking at, we can't require any offsite improvements as part of any SB 9 project, which with subdivisions, we could look at that and if there's a nexus, make a requirement there.
Okay, and then does the SB 9 lot split piece take into consideration the city arborist's requirements for things like heritage trees and that sort of thing? How does that dovetail in?
Yeah, so the SB 9 applications are reviewed by planning, public works, fire, and the arborist. If trees are to be removed, the arborist will review and apply any objective standards we have in our tree ordinance. If a very magnificent tree is proposed for removal, we would encourage the owner to potentially try to save the tree or redesign, but we are somewhat limited in what we can do because of the state law.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
It looks like we don't have any more hands raised.
All right. With no more comments, I think we might call it a night, unless Zach, you have anything else to add to our presentation.
Sure, I think probably just in wrap up, as you noted, we appreciate everyone that took the time to join us this evening. And you will have additional opportunities, or if you have friends or neighbors or other residents around town who have thoughts on SB 9, up to the Planning Commission hearing, which will be happening later this month, and then when this ultimately goes to City Council for adoption. So you can email Laura or Linda or myself with comments, or direct your comments to the Planning Commission in the lead up to the Planning Commission hearing, and then similarly with the City Council hearing as well. And yeah, we look forward to getting any and all feedback and then incorporating it as we can. When we'll definitely provide acknowledgements, but as we've noted, since this ordinance is responding to state legislation, we do have limits on what can go into this ordinance. But other than that, just appreciate your time here tonight, and appreciate the effort put in by Laura and Linda and the team here to get this effort moving forward and put this workshop together tonight.
All right, well, thank you all. And I look forward to hearing from you, and thank you for your participation. It's much appreciated. Have a good night, and we will see you hopefully in August for the Planning Commission.